Salini of Valdruza lay hidden behind 3 ridges of black pine and limestone, at the end of a road so narrow that 2 carts could not pass each other without one backing into the weeds. In dry weather the road lifted dust into your teeth. In rain it turned to a ribbon of brown water that swallowed boots to the ankle. Fewer than 100 people lived there. Their families had clung to the mountain for generations, scraping potatoes and rye from thin fields, keeping goats, cutting timber, patching roofs, marrying one another, burying one another, and calling it life because there had never been much else to call it. News from the world below reached Valdruza late, if it reached at all. Strangers almost never came. The villagers trusted old rules more than laws written in distant offices. They believed in the mountain saints, in signs at birth and death, in grudges carried by blood, in the evil eye, in the bargains made by the desperate. If a life went wrong, people said there must have been a debt behind it. Something owed by a grandparent, something offended, something in the family line that had finally come to collect. In such a village, to have no child was worse than being poor. Poverty could be explained by weather, land, taxes, bad luck. A childless house was explained in whispers. Stefan Duran and his wife Mara had been married many years. They were not rich, but they had a stone house, 2 strips of field, a shed full of cut wood, and enough potatoes in the cellar to see them through winter. What they did not have was the sound of a child in the house. By day, Stefan could take up his hoe and go to the fields, pretending not to hear the talk that drifted after him over the low walls. At night, when the stove died down and the beams creaked in the cold, the silence of the house frightened him. Mara would open the cedar chest at the foot of their bed, take out the tiny shirts she had sewn when she was still young enough to be certain life would be kind, smooth them across her knees, and fold them away again. The cloth had yellowed. She could not throw it out. Once, a neighbor's little boy ran in for water. He drank from the chipped cup, slammed it back on the table, called out, "Thank you, Aunt Mara," and vanished into the lane. Mara stood in the doorway long after he was gone. When she came back inside, she said quietly, "If only we had one. Even a noisy one. Even a wicked little thing who broke every plate in the house." Stefan did not answer. He only knocked his pipe against the doorstep, again and again, until the bowl was empty. The next morning, he went to see the old woman at the upper end of the village. People called her Baba Ilona, though no one knew whether she had ever had children or grandchildren of her own. Her roof was hung with drying herbs, foxglove, yarrow, rue, and bunches of straw tied with red thread. When babies screamed through the night, when cows would not calve, when a bride bled too long or a man saw his dead mother by the well, someone went to Baba Ilona. She listened to Stefan with her eyes half closed, then spat into the fire and counted on her fingers. "If you want a child," she said, "go to the chapel of Saint Margaret above Vrange. Start from your own threshold. 1 step, 1 kneeling. 1 step, 1 prayer. Keep your head low. Do not bargain loudly. The saint hears women in labor and men who have finally learned how to beg. If she sees your heart, she may send blood into your house." Stefan nodded as if she had handed him a rope thrown down into a well. At the hour Baba Ilona named, he set out. The road to Vrange was made of shale and old mule stones. Stefan took 1 step, knelt, bowed until his forehead nearly touched the road and rose. 1 step, kneel, bow, rise. At first people watched from doorways, some pitying him, some smirking, some crossing themselves. By the time the sun climbed above the ridge, they had gone back to their chores. Stefan was alone on the mountain road, moving forward by the length of 1 body and 1 humiliation at a time. Pebbles cut through his trousers. Blood ran from his forehead into the sweat at his temples. He did not wipe it away. Mara followed at a distance for a while, wanting to call him back. But when she saw his back folding again and again toward the earth, she swallowed the words. After several hours, Stefan reached the chapel. It stood above Vrange where the road bent toward the pass, a crumbling roadside shrine with a cracked bell, a crooked wooden door, and ivy pushing through the plaster. Inside, dust lay thick on the sill. Spiderwebs veiled the corners. The painted face of Saint Margaret had been darkened by generations of candle smoke. She held a palm in one hand and a child wrapped in red cloth in the other. Stefan set out the offerings he had brought: bread, honey, a little cheese wrapped in linen, and a beeswax candle he had bought in town and saved for months. He lit the wick, knelt, and pressed his forehead 3 times to the cold stone floor. Saint Margaret, he whispered over and over, repeating the words Baba Ilona had taught him. Give us a child, a son or a daughter. Let blood remain in my house. I, Stefan Duran, will remember this mercy as long as I breathe. Later, people in Valdruza said that when he came home, his knees were swollen like split fruit, and his forehead had crusted black with blood. Stefan did not feel pain. He felt that half his life had already been paid out, and he was waiting for heaven to answer with the other half. Not long afterward, Mara conceived. The news moved through Valdruza like wind through dry grass. Some said Stefan's devotion had softened Saint Margaret. Some said Mara had always had a child written into her life, and the child had simply been slow in arriving. Others muttered that a woman her age ought not to carry, that late blessings often came with teeth. Stefan heard them and did not answer. He rose earlier than ever, hauled water, split wood, worked the fields, and came home to help Mara walk slowly around the yard. As her belly grew, the empty room inside him seemed to fill with light. Mara hoped too. She sat by the stove sewing a little quilt, her stitches uneven but careful. Sometimes Stefan laughed gently and said, "There's time yet. Why hurry?" Mara would lay a hand over her belly. "There isn't so much time. The baby is listening in there. I don't want the child thinking we prepared nothing." Whenever Stefan heard the word child, he could not keep his mouth from trembling into a smile. He wanted a son, yes, because the men in the village told him a house needed a boy to keep the name alive. But he wanted a daughter too. He wanted any child who came breathing into the world. Boy or girl, the baby would be the life he and Mara had been denied for half their years. Near the end of the pregnancy, a heavy rain settled over Valdruza. That night there were no insects, no owls. The wind pressed against the roof, as if something huge had lowered itself over the village. Mara's pains began without warning. She gripped the bed frame so hard her knuckles blanched, sweat running from her hairline. Stefan went cold with terror. He threw on his coat and stumbled into the rain, slipping twice on the stones before he reached the midwife's house. By the time the midwife arrived, Mara could no longer speak in whole sentences. The oil lamp shuddered against the wall and made her face look almost blue. The midwife felt the child's position, and her expression darkened. She turned to Stefan. "You must prepare yourself. This is a bad birth. We may not keep them both." Stefan stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. But Mara understood. She turned her head toward him, her voice so thin it nearly dissolved into the rain. "Stefan," she breathed, "the child must live." The midwife told him to boil water and not stand there like a post. Stefan lurched into the kitchen, but he could not make the match catch. His hands shook so violently, he could barely feed wood into the stove. From the next room came Mara's muffled cries. With each one, something inside him dropped lower and lower. That night stretched so long, he never again in his life allowed himself to remember it from beginning to end. Near dawn, the baby cried. It was a sharp, weak cry, but it was real. It came from the room where Mara lay. Stefan rushed in and saw the midwife holding a red, wrinkled little girl. "A daughter," the midwife said. Stefan took the baby, shaking all over. He carried her to Mara. "Look," he said, his voice broken out of shape. "Look, Mara. Our child. We have a child at last." Mara forced her eyes open. She looked at the small, crumpled face and her mouth moved faintly, almost a smile. She tried to lift her hand. It rose halfway and fell. The midwife's face changed. She pressed hard between Mara's legs, but the blood kept coming. Stefan knelt with the baby in his arms and begged her to save his wife until his throat tore. The midwife's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head. "I am not God," she said. "I have done everything I know." Mara died before the rain stopped. She never fed the child. She never heard the name Stefan would choose. The next day, under a low gray sky, Stefan wrapped his wife in an old linen sheet and buried her at the edge of their field. There was no proper coffin, no full funeral procession. Only a handful of villagers stood in the mud with black scarves over their heads, rosaries wound around their fingers, murmuring that she had been unlucky from the start. Someone tied a strip of black crepe to the gate. Someone lit 2 beeswax candles in the window. By evening, the wind had blown one of them out. After that, Stefan moved as if half his body had been taken from him. By day, he sat on the doorstep with his daughter in his arms, looking toward the field where Mara lay. By night, when the baby cried, he stumbled up in panic to warm goat's milk, wash cloths, change her wrappings, and pace the floor until dawn. People told him to send the girl to relatives, that an old man had no business raising a daughter alone. Others said the child had killed her mother by coming into the world, that a baby born with such a debt would bring trouble. The first time Stefan heard this spoken aloud, he lost his temper in front of half the village. He clutched the swaddled child to his chest, his eyes red. "Mara paid for her with her life," he said. "The next person who speaks evil of my daughter does not cross my threshold again." He named the child Salini. Mara had died on a moonless night, and Stefan wanted the girl to grow up seeing all the moonlight her mother had missed. As Salini grew, her eyes and brow became Mara's, but her smile seemed to brighten the dim rooms of the house. Stefan swallowed every hardship and made the girl the one remaining purpose of his life. But the mountains around Valdruza were high, the road was narrow, and the old laws inside people's hearts ran deeper than either. As Salini grew, the shadows of fate, womanhood, shame, and blame began inching toward her. When Salini was 7, she learned for the first time that the sky beyond Valdruza could be different. That morning, Stefan packed 6 months' worth of saved eggs into a basket and caught the fattest hen from the yard. He carried them down to the mayor's house. He had hardly begged anyone in his life, but for Salini to attend school in the valley, he stood for a long time outside Mayor Kovac's door before finally lowering his head. "A child can't spend her whole life digging in stones," Stefan said, rubbing his rough hands together, his voice low as if he feared waking someone. "I never learned my letters. I have paid for that all my life. Her mother is gone. I cannot let the girl be buried here before she even begins." Mayor Kovac accepted the eggs and the hen. 10 days later, he sent word to the primary school in the market town below. On the first day of school, Stefan dressed Salini in a new flowered dress. He had bought it from the cheapest stall in the district town. The cloth was stiff, the seams plain, but when Salini turned once in the yard, she looked like a small wildflower opened against a wall of old stone. Stefan's eyes stung. He bent quickly to brush dust from her satchel. "Listen to the teacher," he said. "Your lunch is wrapped in the towel. It should stay warm a while." Salini nodded and held the old green satchel against her chest. She did not tell him she had barely slept the night before. Her mind had been full of the town's bright windows, the smell from the bakery, the girls in clean blouses walking past the church with books in their arms. Someday, she thought, she would take her father away from Valdruza to a place with lamps, books, and moonlight that was not cut into pieces by the mountains. But school was not the place she had imagined. The children at the town primary quickly learned she was from Valdruza, that she had only an old father, that her mother had died giving birth to her. Some called her cursed to her face. Some said she was a chapel child, begged from a saint instead of born properly. Boys dropped beetles into her lunch tin. Girls smeared dirt on her flowered dress and laughed that she smelled like a goat shed. At first she cried. Later she stopped. Whenever she was hurt, she hid behind the old chestnut tree at the far edge of the schoolyard, wiped her face dry, and returned to class to finish her letters. When she came home and Stefan asked whether school was good, she smiled. "It's good," she said. "The teacher said my handwriting is neat." The wrinkles in Stefan's face loosened with pride. He did not know that her lunch was often thrown to the floor. He did not know she used pencil stubs so short they cut into her fingers because she was saving every coin. He did not know that each day, walking the mountain road back to Valdruza, Salini recited her lessons into the wind, word by word, as if she could pull herself out of the village mud by language alone. 6 years passed. Salini remained first in the school. On graduation day, when the teacher read the results, the classroom fell strangely silent. The children who had mocked her lowered their eyes. Salini stood by the desk holding her certificate and did not smile. She only wanted to run home and tell her father. In those years, Stefan had grown old quickly. Once he had carried 2 sacks of grain up the mountain without stopping. Now he could barely lift the water bucket by the gate. To keep Salini in school, he sold what little could be sold and hired himself out to other households at harvest until coughing dragged him upright in the night. When Salini entered the lower secondary school in the valley, the house grew poorer still. She rose before dawn to cook thin oat porridge, wash her father, give him his medicine, and then hurry down the road with her books. She believed hardship could be survived if one endured it long enough. Then Mayor Kovac began coming to the house. Valdruza had elected a new mayor, a man in his 30s from outside the village, who liked to say the municipality had a responsibility to its poorest households. The first time he came to Stefan's house, he carried flour and cooking oil and wore a public smile. Salini stepped out to take the supplies. His gaze landed on her face and stayed there too long. "You've grown," Kovac said. "Your father is a fortunate man." Salini accepted the flour and tried to step back. He caught her hand as if by accident and squeezed hard. From inside, Stefan coughed and called, "Mayor, do I need to sign for anything?" Only then did Kovac let go and go inside to perform his concern. As he left, he glanced back at Salini with eyes like something slick moving under a stone. After that, he came every few days. Sometimes he claimed he needed to check the welfare list. Sometimes the district office required questions. Sometimes he said he could help Salini apply for a stipend. Each time he found a reason to stand too close. When Salini moved away, he smiled. When she stared coldly at him, his words became uglier. "You're a girl alone with a sick old man," he said. "How long do you think you can manage? Come to me and you won't worry about food or clothes. When your father dies, I can help with that too." The slap Salini gave him cracked through the room. Kovac stared, stunned. Then his face darkened. He shoved her to the floor and called her an ungrateful little whore. From the bed, Stefan struggled upright, shaking with rage. "Mayor Kovac," the old man rasped, his voice nearly broken, "you can bully a dying man if it pleases you, but do not touch my daughter. If you come here again, I will come back from the grave. I will stand behind you until your last breath, and my soul will give you no rest." Perhaps the room was too dark that day. Perhaps Stefan's eyes were too cold. Kovac for a moment looked truly afraid. He cursed his way out of the house, but he did not leave Salini in peace. The next day, rumors spread through Valdruza. People said Salini was no innocent. They said she had lured men for money. They said the welfare flower in Stefan's house had been bought with her face, her body, whatever word each mouth preferred. The talk moved like dirty water from lane to lane, from Valdruza to the valley, and finally into the school. Those who had once tormented her found fresh reasons. Someone carved filth into her desk. Someone covered his nose when she walked past. Her class teacher called her into the office and spoke gently, but with cold meaning under every word. "Salini, you are an excellent student," the teacher said. "But the situation outside has become difficult. The school has its reputation to consider. Perhaps you should stay home for a while." Salini's face went white. She clutched the teacher's sleeve. For the first time in school, she begged. "Please, I can't leave. My father is waiting for me to get out. I can't go back." The teacher pulled her sleeve free and did not meet her eyes. When Salini stepped out of the office, rain was falling. She stood beneath the eaves and watched water pour from the roof in a silver rope. She remembered her father telling her that when the road became impossible, she should lift her head and look for the moon. But the clouds were thick that day, and there was nothing above her but gray. In the end, old headmaster Zorik kept her. He was close to retirement, with white hair and a habit of speaking only when words were necessary. When Salini knelt in his office, he startled and hurried to raise her up. "Child," he said, placing a cup of hot tea into her hands, "study is not shameful. Poverty is not shameful. The dirt in other people's mouths does not belong on your skin. You keep reading. I will speak for you here." Salini held the cup with trembling fingers. She had not felt such kindness in a long time. It was like someone lighting a lamp in a winter room. She did not know that when she carried that small lamp home, she would find her father hanging from the beam. Stefan had left her a note in his crooked, painful writing. He had never learned much more than his name, and the paper held only a few sentences. "My moon, I have become a weight on you. Study, leave this place. Do not look back." Salini made no sound. She stood in the doorway with both hands pressed over her mouth, tears striking the floor one by one. In that moment, it was as if something had hollowed her out, leaving only a breathing shell. The next day, she wrapped her father in a linen sheet and buried him beside her mother. There was no money for a coffin. The wake was poor and bare. 2 candles smoked on the table beside a cheap crucifix. A black ribbon hung from the door latch. Holy cards fluttered under the stones she had placed to hold them down, and strips of white cloth tied to the eaves moved like exhausted ghosts. Mayor Kovac came again. He crossed himself 3 times before the little table where Stefan's photograph stood, then turned and lowered his voice. "Now your father is gone," he said. "No one is left to protect you. Either you come to me, or you get out of Valdruza." Salini lifted her head. Her eyes were red but terribly bright. "My mother and father are buried here," she said. "You don't get to drive me away." Kovac reached for her. At that instant, the white cloths in the morning room stirred, though there was no wind. Ash from the candle dish rose in a sudden gray coil. The house turned cold as a grave. Beside Kovac's ear came Stefan Duran's voice, low and close against the back of his neck. "Get away from my daughter." Kovac screamed and scrambled out of the house on his hands and knees. After that, he never again dared come alone. But the rumors had become the village knife, and everyone held it while insisting their own hands were clean. Women poured filth over Salini's name at the well. Men blocked the road at night. Children followed her chanting ugly rhymes they had learned from their parents. Salini swallowed it all. At night she lit a kerosene lamp and kept studying. She knew there was only one road left. Pass the exams. Leave Valdruza. Several years later, the entrance results came down. Salini had placed first in the entire valley and won admission to the provincial gymnasium in Marienburg, the best secondary school for miles. When the acceptance letter arrived at the lower school, Headmaster Zorik placed it in her hands himself. He looked at the girl before him, thin as a reed, and his eyes grew wet. "You have won 1 step," he said. "The road is still long. Do not be afraid of it." Salini touched the gold letters on the page for a long time. She did not go home first. She ran to the field where her parents lay, knelt between their graves, and opened the letter for them to see. "Papa, Mama, I got in." She laughed through her tears. "I can leave. When I become someone, I'll come back and mend your graves. I'll show you the moon beyond the mountains." That evening, a pale mist lay across the road. Salini placed the letter carefully in her satchel and started home. Near the deadwood forest, she saw men waiting in the path. At their head stood Gregor Krauge from the neighboring village. Behind him were several young men from Valdruza. Gregor had followed her more than once. She had refused him publicly. He had not forgiven her. Salini turned to run, but the way behind her was already blocked. After that day, Salini never came home to Valdruza. Some villagers saw her being dragged into the deadwood forest and lowered their heads as they passed. Others heard a cry for help from the direction of the old coaching inn and shut their doors. Later, Gregor and the others returned with mud on their clothes and strange faces. When someone asked about Salini, they said the girl had been accepted at the school in Marienburg and had run off that same night. No one looked further. Only Headmaster Zorik knew something was wrong. He went to Stefan's house and found the gate locked, the stove cold, Salini's washed thin school uniform still hanging on the wall. He reported her missing to the district police, but the mountains kept few traces, and the villagers said with one voice that Salini had left on her own. In the end, the case became a folder, and the folder became dust. Salini had been buried beneath the ancient tree that stood before the abandoned coaching inn deep in the deadwood forest. Her satchel was shoved into a hollow in the trunk. The acceptance letter inside had been soaked with blood and mud, but the writing had not completely disappeared. From that night on, Valdruza knew no peace. The first to suffer was Matko, one of the men who had helped Gregor. Each night he dreamed of a girl in a flowered dress standing beside his bed. "Where is my satchel?" she asked. "Where is my letter? Where did you bury my road?" Matko grew half mad with fear. One night he took a shovel and went to the old inn to destroy whatever remained. The next morning he did not return. Under the ancient tree, villagers found a broken shovel. The earth had been opened and closed again, as though something beneath it had reached up and dragged him into a darkness deeper than soil. Then the others began to die. One fell into the river while washing his hands. Another heard a woman crying on the mountain road, turned his head, and slipped over a cliff. Mayor Kovac did not escape. He was already sick with guilt over the rumors that had helped destroy Stefan's house, and more afraid still that the old crime might touch him. He lit beeswax candles before every saint he could name in the village church. The more candles he lit, the colder his house became. At last, on a rainy night, he ran out like a madman and knelt at Stefan Duran's grave, pressing his forehead into the mud and saying he had been wrong. The next morning they found him lying beside the grave, a fistful of sodden prayer cards crushed in his mouth. The old people said it was vengeance from an unquiet soul. But Valdruza's true punishment was the flood. That year, the rainy season came strangely. Rain fell in the mountains for 7 days and 7 nights. The river swelled until it ran black. The villagers cursed the weather from inside their houses and refused to believe danger had lowered itself over them. On the 8th night, a deep sound came from the slope above the village, like a corner of the sky breaking off. Mud and floodwater crashed into Valdruza. It came too fast for dogs to bark, too fast for lamps to be lit, too fast for sleeping people to open their eyes. Those who had watched Salini suffer and stayed silent, those who had poured filth over her name, those who had made her pain into gossip, were swept into the black water that night. At dawn, Valdruza was broken walls, shattered tiles, and pale cloth hanging from branches. Half of Stefan's little house had collapsed, but the graves of Stefan and Mara were strangely untouched. Some said the flood had divided around the 2 small mounds, as if it did not dare disturb the people sleeping there. Gregor Kralj did not die. A few days before the flood, he had gone down to the district seat to stay with relatives. Afterward, he ingratiated himself with the right men, changed his name, and climbed. Over the next 15 years, he became a respected figure in Jasnik district, a man with polished shoes, drivers, handshakes, and people who wrote down what he said. As long as he lived, Salini's grief did not disperse. Years later, a group of young documentary filmmakers lost their way in the ruined mountains above Valdruza. They had come to film abandoned villages in the wake of the old landslides. Their leader was Kester Vale, a young writer who made his living on crime podcasts and strange local histories. With him were Celia, Mira, Jaro, Tomas, and Nico. They drove a four-wheel drive van into the mountains, but the navigation failed halfway up and the fuel gauge dropped to empty for no reason. After dark, they had no choice but to camp among the ruins. The next day, they followed the sound of water through the deadwood forest and found the old coaching inn. It had been abandoned for decades, yet a yellow lamp hung beside the door. When Kester pushed, the door opened at once. Inside, the place was unnaturally clean. Behind the counter sat an old couple. The woman's face was pale as candle wax. The old man said nothing. He only watched them with cloudy eyes. "You may stay," the old woman said slowly. "But the last room on the second floor is not to be entered. That is my daughter's room. She likes quiet." The group exchanged glances. They thought they had found some strange mountain caretakers, half lost to age and isolation. But that night, when the inn began to fill with the sound of a woman quietly weeping, no one slept. The crying did not seem to come from any one room. It seeped from the walls, the floorboards, the beams, and the ground beneath them all at once. Kester took a flashlight and went downstairs. The beam caught something on the wall of the common room. An old photograph. In it was a teenage girl in a flowered dress, clear-eyed and slight, holding a book to her chest. Under the photograph, in faded ink, was one word. Salini. Kester felt his throat tighten. He remembered a broken stone he had seen in the ruins that afternoon. On it, half hidden by moss, he had made out the name Stefan Duran. On the third day, their cameras began recording things that were not there. A hallway that had been empty in the viewfinder showed, in playback, a girl with a satchel on her shoulder. She stood at the end of the second floor, half her face in shadow, one finger pointing toward the ancient tree outside the window. Kester led the others to the tree. Inside the hollow trunk, they found a rotted satchel. The outer cloth crumbled in their hands, but inside, wrapped in stiff oil paper, lay an acceptance letter yellowed with age. The name remained legible. Salini Duran. Marienburg Provincial Gymnasium. No one spoke. Jarrow found several old bones near the roots. Tomas dug a rusted hair clip out of the mud. At that moment, from the second floor of the inn, came the sound of a wooden door opening. The old woman stood at the top of the stairs, her eyes empty. "She has waited a long time for you," she said. "She does not want to harm you. She only wants someone to know she was alive." That night, Kester tried the satellite unit again. Before they found the satchel, every device had been dead. Now, with the satchel exposed to the air, the satellite signal returned by a single bar. He sent the message. Within hours, the outside world answered. When the police came up the mountain, a fine rain was falling around the old inn. Headmaster Zorik was very old by then, but he came leaning on a cane. When he saw the acceptance letter, his hands shook so badly he almost dropped it. He crouched beneath the tree, tears running down the folds of his face. "My child," he said hoarsely, "your teacher failed you. I made you wait all these years." The case was reopened, and the truth rose piece by piece. Most of the villagers from that time had died in the flood, but there were fragments. Things said before death, student records kept by Zorik, the objects found at the coaching inn, the images captured by the filmmakers. Again and again, everything pointed to one man. Gregor Kralj. By then, he used another name. At first, he denied everything. He sat behind a broad desk in his district office, slammed his palm down, and called it superstition. He said a village girl dead for 15 years could not bring charges from the grave. That night, the lights in his office went out. On the security footage, Gregor sat alone in his chair. Suddenly, he raised his head as if he had seen someone standing in front of him. He backed step by step into the corner, repeating, "It wasn't only me. It wasn't only me. Don't come for me." Then he opened the safe with his own hands and took out an old ledger. Between its pages were the names of the men involved and the torn corner of an acceptance letter. He had kept the evidence all those years, not out of remorse, but to hold power over the others and protect the road he had stolen for himself. When the police arrived, Gregor was on the floor, gray-faced and shaking. He could no longer argue. He only repeated, "She came." She was standing in the doorway the whole time. The day Gregor was taken to court, rain poured over Jasnik. As he was led out after sentencing, he heard a girl's voice beyond the crowd. "Do you remember the Deadwood Forest?" He spun around. There was no one there. Only rain running down the courthouse, steps like a river that had arrived too late. He was judged for the old crime and for the years he had spent hiding it. When the sentence was read, he seemed to collapse inward, all his dignity draining from him. He sat in the dock like an emptied sack, with no trace left of the important man he had pretended to be. Salini's remains were buried beside her parents. Headmaster Zorik placed the restored acceptance letter in a small glass case at the foot of her grave. Kester and the others came too. They brought no cameras, made no speeches, carried no spectacle with them, only a small bundle of white flowers. At dusk, the rain stopped. Above the ruins of Valdruza, the clouds slowly parted. A full moon rose from behind the ridge, bright and clear, shining over Stefan's broken yard, over the two old graves, and over the new stone set beside them. The stone read, ** Salini Duran. ** At last, she saw the moonlight. ** That night, the lamp at the old coaching inn went out. No crying came from the Deadwood Forest. The wind moved through the branches with only the faintest rustle, like someone who had waited too long finally, releasing the last breath held in her heart.